What's up, everybody? Today I thought I would do a monthly reading wrap up for the month of January. I read a total of 12 books this month, and I thought I would start getting into the habit of doing this again. I used to do reading wrap ups on my channel a while back, just kind of periodically. It's not something I did on a regular basis. But my goal this year is to kind of get back into doing this more often. I'm going to try to do one for every month of the year. No promises, no guarantees. Sometimes life gets in the way, or sometimes I just don't feel like making videos. But I'm going to try to do a monthly reading wrap up throughout this year, just because it kind of gives me a chance to talk about everything that I'm reading, especially outside of kids' horror and young adult horror, which is mainly what I review on here, as you guys know. So, yeah, it kind of gives me a chance to go over some of these other books that I'm reading and talk about them and do just kind of brief reviews for them. I kind of like doing shorter reviews because it kind of takes away from that pressure of having to do a more in-depth review and having to analyze the book a little bit. And yeah, just gives me a chance to just kind of share my brief thoughts, I guess, on everything that I'm reading. So the very first book that I read this month in January, I don't have a copy of it. I actually borrowed it from the library, but I'll pop a picture of it somewhere up here on the screen, and it is called The Late Night Horror Show by Bryan Smith. Now, I read one other book by Bryan Smith, and it was Depraved, and I read that a couple years ago, I think, and it was one of the most disturbing books that I've ever read in my life. But I did really enjoy it. It was a very suspenseful book, and since then, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it, and I've been wanting to check out more by this author. And Bryan Smith is an author of extreme horror, so just know that if you're curious about checking this author out. And this one particularly wasn't all that disturbing or scary or gruesome. The premise of this one is basically this group of stereotypical characters, 20-something young people that just want to party and have a good time, go to this big horror movie marathon showing at their local theater. And what happens is they kind of split up and go into see these different movies. There's like a zombie one. There's a slasher film that's like a Texas Chainsaw ripoff, essentially. And then the other one is a vampire movie. And these characters get sucked into these various films and then are stuck in this movie world where they have to try to survive and figure out how to get back into the real world. And then, so we're constantly switching POVs, following these different characters as they traverse this movie world that they're in. And then we also get the POV from this character who remained in the theater and discovers that this movie theater is actually some kind of, I don't even know exactly what it was or how to describe it. Some kind of like platform or UFO, something like supernatural, where it's being run by this villain who sort of put a curse on these movies, I guess, and allowed these people to be sucked into them. I don't know. I don't really remember all the fine details about it. I just know that it wasn't something I was really on board with, if I'm being honest. It reminded me a lot of like Cabin in the Woods, with this main villainous character sort of overseeing this like program that he's created and kind of watching these characters fight for their lives in these various films against the zombies and the vampires and things of that nature. And, you know, I kind of like the idea that this one had. I thought it would be a lot more fun than it was going into it. But it just ended up being a slight disappointment because it was just kind of cheesy and also felt sort of generic. I didn't really care about any of the characters in this book. They're all very bland, and most of the characters in this book are just assholes, and you kind of just want to see them die. And I don't know. It was okay. It wasn't terrible. I gave it, let's see, a 2.5 out of 5 stars. Definitely not as good as Depraved. I would recommend checking that one out as long as you are not squeamish and you know, you have an idea of what you're getting into with extreme horror. But yeah, the Late Night Horror Show, this one was just alright. But I definitely want to read more by Bryan Smith in the future. So yeah, that was the first book I read. The second book I read is this one here, A Ghost of Fear Street. This is Don't Ever Get Sick at Granny's. And I did an individual review of this one, so I won't talk too much about it. But I will just say that this is one of the most bizarre children's horror books that I have ever read. This book is just insane. It's weird. It's zany. It's just, I don't know. This book is basically just one giant fever dream, both figuratively speaking and literally speaking. So yeah, Don't Ever Get Sick at Granny's. I gave that book also a 2.5 out of 5 stars. I struggled with the rating for this one because I still to this day I'm not sure how I feel about it. Part of me likes it because of how unusual that it is, and then also part of me just thinks that this is just a kind of a bad book. So yeah, Don't Ever Get Sick at Granny's was the second book I read this month. The third book that I read this month is A Nest of Nightmares by Lisa Tuttle. And I didn't read this book like all the way through in one sitting. I kind of read, this is a short story collection. I kind of read this throughout the month of January. I started it like first week of January and finished it just like a week ago or a little over a week ago. And this is a reprint of the Paperback from Hell era of books. And I was kind of excited going into this because I've heard a lot of good things about it. Lisa Tuttle, I don't think she wrote a lot, but I've heard mostly good things about her works. In this short story collection, it was just not for me. I'm not really sure what it was about it. I just wasn't a fan of her writing style. And a lot of the stories in here are very short and ambiguous. She has like a very subtle kind of horror in her stories. It reminds me a little bit of Shirley Jackson. I feel like Lisa Tuttle is almost trying to imitate Shirley Jackson's writing style, but where Shirley Jackson succeeded in writing very like subtle, kind of a more quiet type of horror that leaves a lot up to the imagination, Lisa Tuttle does not come anywhere near that level of success and just executing that kind of horror very well compared to her, in my opinion. And yeah, I don't know. There weren't really any stories in here that stood out to me. To be honest, none of them I loved. But there weren't any that I quite hated either. They were just kind of forgettable to me. Some of the ideas were kind of bonkers in here. I liked some of the ideas behind a few of the stories, but a lot of the times they just ended very abruptly and with just leaving the story leaving nothing but just implications, and then you trying to like figure out what the rest of it is, I guess. I don't know. A Nest of Nightmares by Lisa Tuttle. I gave that one 2.25 out of 5. Not bad, just not really my cup of tea. So yeah. Okay, let's see here. The fourth book that I read this month is a Bone Chillers book. The very first Bone Chillers book, Beware the Shopping Mall. And I did not really care for this one either. I had a few just kind of mediocre 2-star books this month, unfortunately. I actually have a lot of those on a regular basis, but yeah, Beware the Shopping Mall. This is one of my least favorite Bone Chillers that I've read so far. And with this being the first one and written by Betsy Haynes, I kind of expected a little bit more out of it. She wrote the first 10 books in the series, if I'm remembering right, and then the rest of them were taken over by ghostwriters. And the other early book in the series that I read was also by Betsy Haynes. I believe it was called Strange Brew. That was the first ever Bone Chillers book that I read, and I quite enjoyed that one. It was pretty good. So I was looking forward to reading another one by her, as the other ones I've read were later books in the series that were ghostwritten, and I wasn't a big fan of those. And this one, it was just kind of a disappointment. It just felt very basic, very childish. It reminded me a bit of a Dead Time Stories books. The Dead Time Stories books, from what I've read so far, are just very simplistic, too kid-friendly, just very simple plots, not a lot going on with them. The writing is a bit bland, and that's the way this one felt. And yeah, I was just a little bit let down with it. Not horrible, like a 2 out of 5 stars, but yeah. Beware the Shopping Mall is the fourth book that I read this month. Okay, the fifth book that I read this month, and I'll post a picture of it somewhere up here on the screen, is A Ghostly Haunting in Grand Haven by Jonathan Rand. So I went book shopping a couple weeks ago, I think, and I saw this like on a discount rack at a used bookstore for 99 cents. I'm like, what the hell? Why not? 99 cents, sure. I'll try out another Chillers book, even though I've kind of given these books a lot of hate and rants over the years, or over the time that I've been reviewing these on YouTube anyway. And this one, believe it or not, was not terrible. I didn't hate it. I definitely didn't like it a whole lot. It's not one I would necessarily recommend, but it was a lot better than Arkansas Algae Monsters, a lot better than the Dogman one. I forget what it was called. The Drummond Island Dogman, I think, from earlier in the Michigan Chillers series. Actually, that's a later one, maybe. I can't remember. But yeah, that was another Michigan Chillers book that I read that I was not good at all. And this one, I also gave it 2 out of 5 stars too. I didn't really care for it all that much. But I did like some of the ideas behind this one. It's basically a haunted house story where the protagonist's father is actually like a ghost hunter, a professional ghost hunter. He has all of this ghost hunting equipment, paranormal investigator type of guy, and he goes to investigate this haunted house, supposedly haunted house. And the main character goes with his dad, and then his friend is with them. And then, as his dad is like setting up equipment and stuff, the kids go off to explore the house. There's a few somewhat creepy scenes in here and things that happen that are a little bit just eerie. And yeah, it was kind of cool. It wasn't too bad. And later in the story, their dad disappears, and they're looking for their dad all over this haunted house. And it turns out there is like this vengeful spirit, and there's a little bit of a twist about like the previous owners of the house that tie into this vengeful spirit and what he's trying to do to the main characters of the story and their father. And yeah, I don't remember all the fine details. It wasn't great by any means, not anything I would go out of my way to recommend, but it wasn't horrible. So that's saying something, because a lot of these Children's books I'm just not a fan of. So Ghostly Haunting in Grand Haven gets a 2 out of 5 stars. Okay. The sixth book that I read in January is Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. And again, this is a library book. I'll pop a picture somewhere up here of it. And I really enjoyed this book. This is hands down my favorite book that I read this month. I gave it a 4.25 out of 5, which is also what I gave to the previous one, Prisoner of Azkaban. So far, I'm having a hard time deciding between these Harry Potter books and which ones I like more. They're all, up to this point, kind of about the same for me, but which is very good, like great. I mean, 4.25 is a pretty high rating. And this is a good book, and this is also the longest one that I've read so far. We get quite a big jump in the length. Prisoner of Azkaban was like 350 pages, I think, and then this one, Goblet of Fire, was like almost 750 pages. So this was quite the chunky novel, and there's a lot of stuff that's different in this book compared to what happens in the movie. There's a lot of things that occur in this book that are not in the movie whatsoever, and I think it's safe to say that the book is better. Some of the earlier Harry Potter books, Chamber of Secrets and Prisoner of Azkaban, those ones I didn't necessarily like a whole lot more than their movie counterparts. I felt like they were about on the same level, and I think the movies' adaptations were a bit more faithful to the source material, most likely because the books were a lot shorter, so there wasn't as much to adapt. With Goblet of Fire, though, there's so much more going on than just what you see in the movie, and I feel like in this case, the book is a lot better. Now, I feel like there were a few parts that were kind of slow. It did meander a little bit. Did it need to be 750 pages? I feel like maybe just a little bit could have been trimmed out. But I'm really enjoying reading through this franchise, so I didn't mind it too much. And yeah, this was a great book with a very dark ending and final act. This is really where the Harry Potter franchise starts to get dark. Very serious at the end. Some messed up things happen. There is some very grisly descriptions of death in this book. And it was a lot of fun. Really enjoyed it. There was one scene that I think the movie counterpart actually did better than in the book. For those of you who have seen the movie, in the Triwizard Tournament, the first tests, or whatever they were called, the tasks actually, when Harry is facing the dragon and he has to like capture the egg. In the movie, the dragon like gets loose of its chain and is basically chasing Harry all around the castle, and Harry is flying on his broom trying to get away from the dragon. In the book, none of that happens. He goes up against the dragon and he basically swoops in, gets the egg almost right away, and that's it. That's the end of the task. It's over very quickly. There's not much suspense to it. So that is one scene that I think the movie version actually did better than the book. So yeah. But overall, I do think the book was better. I really enjoyed Goblet of Fire, and I look forward to reading through the rest of this franchise. I will probably read Order of Phoenix next month, which is the next book in the series, and that one is even longer. That is the longest Harry Potter book in the franchise. I believe it is like 800-something pages. So yeah. Then the seventh book that I read this month is another Ghost of Fear Street book, Fright Night. And I just kind of picked this one up on impulse. And this one was a bit of a letdown. Let me see. What did I rate this book? I gave it a 2.25 out of 5, so not terrible. This is just one that feels a bit nonsensical. Basically, the main character and his dad run like a sort of haunted type museum with focus on objects of like the macabre, I guess, like old torture devices and just, weird items that are on display. They have like this museum in their house where people come to visit, and they get shipped this piece of armor from like New England, I think, or London or whatever, and it's supposedly haunted. And their main character hears some noises at night, and he goes to investigate, and this piece of haunted armor sort of like comes to life. There's like glowing eyes coming out of the helmet, and this haunted armor, whatever it is, basically tries to kill him. And yeah, just a lot of action ensues, but it's all very like nonsensical and kind of cheesy, and there's really not a lot of logic or plot behind this book. It's just, yeah, I don't know. It wasn't horrible, but it didn't really impress me all that much. Again, I gave this one a 2.25 out of 5. It's just fine. So yeah, Fright Night, that was the 7th book that I read this month. Okay, the 8th book that I read this month, again, this was also a library book, so I don't have a copy of it, but I'll post a picture somewhere up here on the screen. And it is called Vampires, Zombies, Werewolves, and Ghosts. And it is edited by, I didn't really write their full names down because I ran out of room on the page, but yeah. It's edited by a couple of people, and it is full of classic horror stories by famous authors such as Stephen King, H.P. Lovecraft, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and various others. And the main reason I picked this book up is because I saw that it had Lot 249 in it by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, which is a story that I've been wanting to read for a while. This story was actually adapted into a segment for the movie Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, which happens to be one of my favorite horror movies and probably my favorite horror movie anthology. And I wanted to read the source material to see how it compared to the episode or the segment adaptation. And I think I liked them about the same, honestly. There were some good things about the story that weren't in the adaptation. It was a bit more creepy, a little bit more serious tone. Whereas the segment adaptation is a little bit more on the cheesy, like campy side, but in a fun kind of way. It's got some comedy to it, and it has like a fun twist ending. But I like them kind of about the same, just for different reasons, I think. And yeah, there were some other really good stories in this book. The Man Upstairs by Ray Bradbury, I really enjoyed that one. I gave that one a 4 out of 5 stars. One of my favorites of this collection. And what else? Of course, has Cool Air in here by H.P. Lovecraft. I like almost everything H.P. Lovecraft does. This one isn't like one of his top best stories, but still good. Like a 3.5 out of 5 stars for that one. And there were a few others that I liked, but for the most part, a lot of the stories in here I didn't really care for all that much. They were just kind of forgettable to me. And I'll actually be honest, I did not read every single story in this book, so I don't know if you could count me having like read this book since I didn't read the entire thing. I don't know. There were a couple stories I skipped. There were a couple stories I also skimmed over because I wasn't enjoying them that much. And then this also has a few excerpts in it from novels, one of them being Dracula. I did not read that because I've already read the novel Dracula a couple of times. I don't need to read an isolated chapter from that book. I don't even know why the editors made the choice to have excerpts from novels in here. It just doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. Why would you want to read an isolated chapter from a novel in a short story collection? I don't get it. And there were a few of those in here. Dracula was not the only one. I believe one of the other ones was The Wolfen by Whitley Strieber, I believe his name is. There was a chapter in there from that one. And there was at least one more that I can't think of off the top of my head. But yeah, I kind of just skipped over those because I don't really want to read just a random chapter from the middle of a book I've already read before, or other books that, I might read eventually or might not even care about. So yeah, it's just a weird decision to me. But I did read the majority of this book. And unfortunately, it was mostly forgettable, but I did enjoy some of the stories in here. Overall, I gave the book 2.5 out of 5 stars. So yeah, that is Vampires, Zombies, Werewolves, and Ghosts. Okay, the next book that I read this month is a graphic novel. I've been getting into reading some more comics and graphic novels lately. That's something that I've never read when I was a kid. Well, I can't say that. I did read a little bit of comics here and there when I was a kid. I really enjoyed reading like the Simpsons comics, and then also like the comic strips, like the Sunday comic strips or whatever, like Calvin and Hobbes and Family Circus and Beetle Bailey and all those types of things. But lately, I've been getting more into graphic novels, which is something that I never thought I would have enjoyed. I used to kind of look down on on that form of storytelling for whatever reason. I don't know why. Like, oh, books with pictures. I don't need to read those. I just prefer to read books with just words. But yeah, I don't know. Lately, I've been getting into them a little bit more. And the one that I read this month, actually, I read a couple of them, but this first one I'll be talking about is called I Hate Fairyland by Skottie Young. And this is somewhat of an impulse buy. I went to my local comic shop and I saw this and was intrigued by the cover and flipped through it and was intrigued by some of the artwork and the premise of this book. And I asked the guy working at the local comic shop if this was any good. And yeah, he recommended it to me. So I'm like, sure, I'll try it out, I guess. And this is basically a very adult, sort of messed up, twisted version of Alice in Wonderland. This little girl you see on the cover here, she's like, I don't know, an 8-year-old girl or something. And she gets sucked into this world with all of these different creatures, fairyland, and all of these just shenanigans ensue. And she has to find this key to figure out how to get back into her own world. And she is stuck in fairyland for a very long time, like 20-something years. But she remains in the body of this little girl, even though her mind is aging. And because she's in this fairyland and she's a human, she has like these powers, I guess. And she's like more powerful than anything in this world. And all of these various creatures are trying to kill her or detain her or something of that sort. And she is basically just killing and fighting all of these crazy creatures, all the while trying to find this magical key that will get her back into the real world. And yeah, this was a fun book. I enjoyed it. It was very funny. This book plays almost straight up for comedy, but it does also have a lot of very gory illustrations. This is a very violent graphic novel. And this is also part of a series. This is the first volume, which contains, I don't know, like the first 4 or 5 issues, I think. But there's quite a few more volumes in the series. I'm not sure if I'll continue the series or not. I didn't quite love this. I gave it a flat 3 out of 5 stars, but I did enjoy reading it. Maybe at some point I'll check out the other volumes. But yeah, that was I Hate Fairyland by Skottie Young. Look at that cover. It's just so cool. Okay, the next book that I read is Ghost Story by Peter Straub. Now, this is a classic horror novel that I have been meaning to get to for a while now. This is something that I've heard nothing but good things about. And I liked it for the most part. This is a very chunky novel. It is almost 600 pages, just shy of 600 pages. And it took me forever to read this book. Goblet of Fire was longer than this, but that one only took me like a little over a week to read, or about a week to read. This one felt like it took me almost 2 weeks. Maybe not quite that long, but this book was a slog to get through. But it was still very, very interesting. It held my interest throughout, even during the slow parts. A lot of this book is just kind of introducing the various characters, their backstories, and it's basically about this group of adults, elderly gentlemen to be more specific, who have this like little club that's kind of like the Midnight Society from Are You Afraid of the Dark. They basically get together, tell stories with a focus on like scary stories, and a lot of them are true stories, and they kind of share these true stories that they've experienced throughout their lives that have, you know, some supernatural stuff going on with them. And they soon learn that there are some connections between these sort of supernatural experiences that they've had throughout their lives. And they learn that there's some connections between these characters and other people that they've met. And they slowly start to kind of uncover this mystery of something sinister that's taking place in sort of like the background. And all the while that this is going on, these characters kind of discovering this stuff and sharing these stories with one another. There's some creepy stuff going on in this town they live in. Some people are slowly dying. Animals, like on people's farms and whatnot, are dying in very mysterious ways. People go missing. And as the story slowly progresses, I will admit this is a very much slow burn. You do have to have a bit of patience for this. But as the story progresses, and We finally get to the reveal and we figure out what's going on. It is absolutely crazy. The story took a turn that I did not expect at all. Things get pretty wild at the end. I was not expecting this book to go in the direction that it did, and I ended up quite enjoying it. This was a very, very well written book, and that's one other thing I want to mention about it is Peter Straub's writing is top notch. Like, he's a very talented author. He's an author that knows what he's doing. He pulls you into the story and doesn't let go. He has more of a literary style. He has very strong prose, and it's just, yeah, Peter Straub is an author that I want to read more of. Although I do hope that the next book that I read by him is, maybe a little bit faster paced and maybe not quite as long. I don't really know if I can read another 600-page book by him. I could, but I don't know if I want to. But yeah, this was a good book. It just takes a little bit of patience to get through the first half of it. But once it gets going, it gets going, and it's pretty crazy. It gets good. Overall, I gave this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed Ghost Story. I think I would recommend this one. So yeah. Okay, the 11th book that I read this month, the other graphic novel. This one is Frank Frazetta's Death Dealer, Volume 1. Now, for those of you who don't know, Frank Frazetta was a famous artist of fantasy books. He's unfortunately no longer with us, but he is known for creating this famous painting back in the 70s that he titled Death Dealer. So this graphic novel started out as just a painting and was later adapted into a graphic novel series. It actually first started out as a comic book series in the 90s that was created by, I believe, Glenn Danzig, who was also a heavy metal music artist. And then later, in the mid-2000s or the 2010s, this second rendition of Death Dealer came out, which is a comic book run that I believe is still going on at this moment. This one has been going on for a while now, but this is just the first volume that contains the first 5 issues. And I have read the comic run that came out back in the 90s, which was pretty decent. I enjoyed it. I don't own it, unfortunately. I just read it online. And this one I also enjoyed. It wasn't great or fantastic. It's basically just really dark fantasy that's very action-packed, very gory. It's very over the top. You have this knight that's basically trapped inside this cursed helmet that sort of possesses him and gives him supernatural strength and invincibility. And these Death Dealer comics are basically this Death Dealer guy going around just slaughtering his enemies. He's an unstoppable force. There is a little bit more story to it. There is a little bit of plot to it, but it is very action focused. And yeah, it's just like a dark fantasy adventure with lots of gruesome scenes and artwork of blood and dismemberment, and it's pretty cool. I like Death Dealer. I eventually might check out the other volumes, but I didn't quite love it. I also gave this a flat 3 out of 5 stars. So yeah, that's Frank Frazetta's Death Dealer. Oh, I also forgot to mention that Frank Frazetta is not the one that wrote this, or he didn't really have anything to do with it other than the cover art, but it's just called that because this book basically originated from a painting that he did. So yeah, the writer of this book and the creator of it, his name is Mitch Iverson. But yeah, that's Death Dealer Volume 1. Okay, and then the very last book that I read this month, number 12, is Haunting with the Stars, book number 17 in the Slappy World series. I'm almost done with the Slappy World series. I've got 4 books left to read, and I'm glad to be almost done with it, because I have not been enjoying it all that much. This might be my least favorite Goosebumps series, if I'm being honest. And this book just further confirms that statement that I made. This was not good. Now, if you take Earth Geeks Must Go from Series 2000, and then Don't Make Me Laugh from the Haunted Library set, which is a very short story, one of the 3 books in this here, which is kind of rare and hard to come by, so maybe a lot of people haven't read that one. But if you take those 2 stories, mix them up, or combine them, you get this book. This book is an exact, combination of those 2. It's a complete rehash of Earth Geeks Must Go and Don't Make Me Laugh. This book leans full on into comedy. There's nothing scary about this. No horror to it whatsoever. You essentially have the protagonist of this book, these two kids, or actually three kids, get thrust into this alien world. They're on this planet where just a lot of silliness ensues. You have these two-headed aliens that tap dance everywhere they go. That's how they move around, is by tap dancing. And they have like hooves. And I feel like that explanation is all you need to know about this book. That pretty much tells you what the tone of this book is and what it's like. And I just did not care for this at all. This book was not good. I'm sorry. Sorry to come in with just negativity. As much as I love Goosebumps, this book was just, I did not like it at all. It wasn't completely horrible. I don't think it's quite the worst Slappy World book that I've read, but I still gave it a 1.5 out of 5 stars. And whenever I do my ranking, this will be towards the bottom of the list. So yeah, Haunting with the Stars is the last book that I read this month. And yeah, I need to get through this series. I've only got 4 more to go. I think I'm just going to power through it so I can do my ranking. But yeah. So those are all the books that I read this month in January. If you have read any of these, let me know what your thoughts are on them down below in the comments. And I will see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.